In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at our upcoming mid-Atlantic snowstorm as well as some more snow threats on the way. We see cold air through about the 25th of February, but we do expect that to end and bring spring-like conditions, which we will discuss as well today. Let's dive into things. And as we take a look at this European model run, we're going to move straight into tomorrow, and we will already see this snowstorm underway with some light to moderate snowfall throughout Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, and into Ohio. This is kind of the theme with this one. It's going to be a lighter to moderate snow event, but impacting areas perhaps that typically, a light to moderate amount of snow will create major impacts because of the kind of lack of snow typically in these areas. I know firsthand as I live in Virginia that even snow falling from the sky and not accumulating creates major issues such as traffic, crashes, even people panic. So these storms, although not major in nature, do create major impacts depending on the areas and people that they are hitting. Keep that in mind, as that's another factor moving forward with this one. As we reach just a couple of hours later, it becomes apparent that this one's a quick mover. Really what it is, we have a lot of high pressure in this area. We can see the high pressure center here and here as well, and this is shoving the low pressure system out. It works like oil and water, so it's racing to get away from that high pressure. It's being pushed by that high pressure out to sea, so that's why we quickly see it racing to the east here as it ends up near kind of the eastern shore of Virginia as 1,002 millibar low pressure center. Again, not really major by nature. 1,002 millibars isn't that crazy. What is leading to this being a little bit more major than it appears is that we do have this kind of southern stream of moisture being injected straight into the storm. So this is why we actually do end up getting some pretty heavy snowfall here at this point in the storm. So it will be falling at a heavy clip here at this point for West Virginia, Northern Virginia, Maryland, DC, Southern Pennsylvania, into Delaware and New Jersey. And keep in mind, it is heavy snowfall, but it's quick moving at this point. So it's picking up and accelerating. So really, I'm thinking a general 2 to 4, maybe 2 to 6 inches with this one for most areas. Typically, areas that do better in this type of a situation is those Appalachian Mountains throughout West Virginia there. They typically do a little bit better. So maybe thinking more like 6 to 10 for them. We'll dive into the total snowfall in a little bit and have some more insight there. As we reach the afternoon of Saturday on the 17th, it's already said and done. What we're left with is a warmer, more high pressure pattern out west with a diving trough here for the east. So expect Saturday to be quite cold regardless for the central and the eastern states here, with the west looking quite warm compared to normal. Keep in mind that warm compared to normal out west still means potential mountaintop snowfall, as their average temperatures are so low that even above normal temperatures are still below freezing. Now, as we keep going, this is pretty much a quieter day for the most part. As we reach towards Sunday, we actually do see quite a bit of snowfall throughout that kind of Rocky Mountain range, extending from Washington State all the way down through into portions of Utah and Colorado, but really quiet out east. By the time we're taking a look at Monday, still quiet in the east. We do have a major storm system out west, though. Again, the low isn't that strong, but we see this injection of moisture with that still ongoing strong Pacific jet stream. It's kind of off and on at this point, but it is still, for the most part, ongoing with some hiatuses there mixed in between. But we still have that atmospheric river bringing major impacts. And, I don't want to act like this is anything too crazy. This is kind of expected in El Nino years. It's just we didn't see it as much in December into the midpoint of January. It's really picked up here as we moved into February, though, and it isn't expected to end anytime soon either. So that's why we're seeing such enormous amount of snowfall compared to what we saw earlier on in the winter. We see this is continuing for the day on Tuesday, February 20th, and even by the time we reach the 21st here, we see that there is continued snowfall. And much like they tend to do, the Sierra Nevada mountains are actually getting kind of the bullseye here. The Rockies probably a close second, and then the Cascade Mountains not doing too shabby either. So ski resorts are rejoicing out west, is really the way I would put it. By the time we're reaching the 22nd, we do have some interesting things going on. This is going to be for Thursday. We see things quieting down out west as some more high pressure ends up being parked for this area. One up there in Canada, one over Nevada, and they're pretty strong, so that is keeping things dry for a little bit there. This is just enough to force some cold air southward for the central and eastern states once again, right around that 22nd time frame. And meanwhile, we have some moisture developing here as we have a low pressure system forming across the deeper south, and this is going to ricochet up the coast alongside this cold air, and I think there is plenty of potential here, so we're going to dive into that. But as we get overnight into Friday, we see this really develop. We have a primary low of 990 there offshore of New England, and then we have 1,002 millibar secondary low down here to the south offshore of Georgia and South Carolina. And really, because of this secondary low, we have this really elongated area of precipitation. If things are just a little bit colder along the coast, or if we see these low pressure systems just a little bit further west, let's say just like this instead of where they're at, we would be taking a look at much more of an opportunity for snowfall in this area. So keep that in mind, that there is a lot of potential here. I know we're not seeing it come together on this model run, but oftentimes they do get it wrong around 200 hours. And that doesn't always play in the benefit of seeing drier, warmer conditions. That's what a lot of people think. They think these things always back down, look warmer and less snowy. And yes, in this day and age, that does happen more oftentimes than not. But there is always that chance that we see things escalate a little bit. And I think a perfect example, and this isn't even a long-range example, this is a short-range example, but our most previous snowstorm that we saw in the Northeast that trended south for Pennsylvania and New Jersey, and we saw areas get snowfall that we're not expecting very much. So things trended much snowier and colder for those areas last minute. So those types of things do happen. Keep that in mind. And that's why we always point out these potentials. Anytime I'm seeing the ingredients of moisture and the ingredients of cold air, and they're within pretty close proximity here, as you can see, that is going to draw some red flags for me as having some potential to be a snowstorm. The only bad news I have here for cold and snow lovers is I know things are looking good here on the 25th. At the end of this model run, but keep in mind that we do have warmer air on the way right here, and I expect that this may be kind of the end of winter. We're already reaching towards late February at this point. We have a warm-up expected for February 25th to last at least 5 to 7 days, and then we're going to be into March. So you know, the potential is getting more and more limited by the day this time of year, and if we see that warm up last more than a week, we're going to be pushing towards mid-March before there's really any potential for return towards cold. And by then, you know, just based on the time of year, we have a lot of things working against us as far as cold and snow. So I think that we have a couple of opportunities left, including this mid-Atlantic threat that we have upcoming, and then also again that kind of 23rd, 24th time frame for another storm, so that's 2. And then after that, you know, warm up for a pretty extended amount of time, taking us towards the springtime. March 1st indicates meteorological spring starting. So things after that point aren't looking very wintry as of now. And really just logically thinking, I'm thinking that our chances are beginning to become pretty limited here. So in other words, you know, I like to be hopeful and optimistic and glass half full, but I do have to say that I think these 2 threats are at least 2 of some of the last of our threats, if not 2 of legitimately the rest of our threats for cold and snow to occur in the eastern states, especially when you're taking a look at the southern Ohio Valley and the southern Mid-Atlantic, and especially the northern Southeast. This is the very, very last threat likely. So keep that in mind. Things do happen, and, you know, we have seen snowfall pretty far south in March, but it's just a lot less likely. And every single day, it's becoming less and less likely. That's kind of the kind of dire thing about this time of year. The end of winter time frame is you're moving in the wrong direction for cold and snow, basically past the beginning of January. Leading up to the beginning of January, you're constantly heading in a better and better direction, of course, for chances. But once you cross that point, it's kind of looking downhill from wherever you're at. So that is the truth of the matter. Once we move into the GFS model, we see the same thing. Mid-Atlantic snowstorm looks very, very similar, although I would say this is pretty far south compared to the European model, probably a little far southeast. I think the European model had this more over the eastern shore. We're seeing it more near the Outer Banks here, and that does bring snowfall pretty far south in Virginia, even south of areas like Williamsburg, south of Richmond. So definitely some pretty big implications here. This would be a pretty different outlook, but we've talked about this recently a lot. The GFS does have a southeast bias. Keep that in mind. Does that always mean it's too far southeast? No, it is sometimes too far northeast. We saw that with our most previous snowstorm, but statistically speaking, it typically is a little too far south, if anything. That doesn't mean it always is. That's why we have to consider all possibilities with these models, because it's just not a complete science at all, unfortunately. Again, we move into a colder pattern for the day on Saturday the 17th into Sunday the 18th. And then we start to see some things warm up, activity return out west there, as we can see. We do get this same threat, but it looks a lot different here for the 22nd, 23rd, whereas the European model had a full-blown Arctic blast here for the eastern states. That's the black line is the European model. The GFS model here in this yellow line is much, much more suppressed with that cold, or I should say a lot more receded with that cold air. It's not as developed or as far south, and because of this, we see the storm track kind of track inland through the Ohio Valley and interior northeast. Whereas on the European model run, we saw that storm ride along this jet stream offshore. So a big, big difference there. Definitely a lot more potential if we see that European model solution, and the GFS model solution has a lot less. If anything, there's a snowfall threat on the GFS model, more like the Great Lakes and Ohio Valley. Keep in mind, this is a perfect example that the GFS model is further to the northwest than the European model. So again, it's not always the furthest southeast. It just tends to do that from time to time. And in my experience, it mostly does that actually along the mid-Atlantic and southeast, maybe even the northeast sometimes, but especially down in these parts. I've noticed firsthand that it does tend to show those storms a little too far to the south, and they do end up trending further north over time up until when we get the storm. So it's particularly common in this southeast corner of the nation. It tends to do it less in other areas in my experience. That doesn't mean it can't do it other places. Again, it's an incomplete science, and these models tend to, be all over the place sometimes. But this model in particular does show things to the southeast, especially in the southeast, and then ends up being wrong sometimes. Sometimes it's right. I know this is just getting confusing at this point. After the 25th, because we do get an extended range here on this GFS model, we actually pick up the steam out west where we get more and more and more snowfall. So things maybe even looking snowier after the 25th than before it, which is almost hard to believe. We do have a very strong storm system here, a 976 over the plains, and this brings a very strong cold front feature as well as a warm front feature out here to the east. And this would be a pretty prime severe weather threat for areas like Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Tennessee, Missouri, Kansas, Oklahoma, Iowa, and Nebraska, depending on temperatures and depending on humidity. But with this warm front set up here, I would say that we probably have warmth and humidity racing northward, and likely, if this was to end up being accurate, this would actually produce some pretty major severe weather, in my opinion, around the 26th, 27th time frame. Keep in mind, this is very far out and could change entirely. It could change a little bit, or it could stay the same. But when you're looking at 10 days plus out, you really, really have to be skeptical when looking at these things to have a pretty open mind that it's possible, but not really probable. We see that race through into the Ohio Valley and Great Lakes and the eastern states, where this storm kind of wants to just sit over the plains and produce a pretty hefty blizzard here for the plains and northern Rockies. That is what this model ends up doing with that storm, and then it eventually moves out where it really develops another cold front, which is interesting, and possibly brings some thunderstorm activity to the southeast this time around that 29th time frame. Also keep in mind that we return to a positive PNA here around the 29th of February, but we don't get that deep cold. We end up actually getting such a strong Pacific jet that it's kind of moving the warmth all the way through to the eastern states, which does happen from time to time. And that is really the theme here. We get a little bit of a cool down here around the 2nd of March, but nothing that's pushing too far to the south. This looks pretty average temperatures to slightly below average temperatures to me around that kind of 2nd of March timeframe. But again, very, very extended range here, so definitely the probabilities shift a little bit when we're looking at very long range forecasts such as this one. The total precipitation forecast, we see a lot out west, especially for Washington, Oregon, and California, so along that western coastline. And this is going to produce a lot of snowfall for the Cascades, Sierra Nevada mountains, and the Rockies, as we still get quite a bit out there as well. This southern stream of moisture is a little too far south and really produces most of it over the Gulf into Florida and then offshore of the kind of southeast coast. So really, we're not going to be too worried about snowfall in these areas. So that stream of moisture doesn't look to produce snowfall. This stream of moisture that does head through the Ohio Valley and into the Mid-Atlantic, however, does look to bring some potential snowfall, as we've mentioned, for these areas. Speaking of snowfall, let's dive into that total snowfall forecast. As probably nobody's surprised, we see tons out west for the Cascades, Sierra Nevadas, and the Rockies there. In the east, again, expecting more of like a 2 to 6 inch snowfall event out here. And really, we're right around 3 to 4 inches, maybe 5 for Missouri eastward into the Mid-Atlantic on this European model. Keep in mind, here's those Appalachian Mountains that I told you guys always kind of do better, and they're looking more at like 6 to 10 inches there throughout portions of West Virginia and even extending into the mountainous areas of Maryland and into Pennsylvania, which there is mountains in Maryland. I've driven through there quite a bit. I love it up there. It is pretty interesting how different this little part of Maryland is from this bigger part. It's very, very different. We also get a pretty minor northeast snowstorm. Didn't really talk about it too much, but it is a 1 to 2 inch event, very light. And a lot of this that you're seeing that's heavier is mostly produced by the Great Lakes. So some lake effect snowfall happening day over day over day. But a more minor snowstorm expected up there. GFS model, tons out west. No surprise, we're going to move into the east. And again, we're looking at about a 2 to 6 inch event there. This is the kind of updated model run, actually, that doesn't get all the way through. Let's take a look at the 12Z run. And I want to get this forward to its completion. And as you can see, same story here, about 2 to 6 inches, more like 2 to 4 mostly on this GFS model. It's a little bit further south here in Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, Virginia, Tennessee, and North Carolina, West Virginia, Maryland, DC, and southern Pennsylvania there into Delaware. Definitely a very interesting, more minor total snowfall, but could bring some major impacts, especially in these more southern areas. Where this ends up being more impactful than it would up north. Again, notice that we're talking about 1 to 2 inches here, and I'm talking about how major the impacts are going to be. We talk about 1 to 2 inches in the northeast, and we're skimming right over it. Definitely the area has a big impact on how we look at things. Again, those Appalachian Mountains in West Virginia here expecting 6 to 10, an area that historically just does very, very well, and those are some very tall mountains out there as well. Overall temperature pattern, we see a little bit of warmth in there. But we do see a big cool down on the way, especially peaking around that kind of 17th through 19th time frame, as this is some pretty deep cold that is working its way into the south central and the eastern states here, and we have relative warmth out west for the most part. As we keep going, we do see a warm up for the east around the 21st, 22nd time frame, and some colder air intruding on the west here, mostly due to these storms that are overhead. But what we end up getting is another Arctic blast, like we mentioned earlier, around that 21st through 24th time frame, where we get another cold period here, peaking on Saturday the 24th. We have a little bit of warmth out west, which is aiding to allow this cold air to really dive southward, but we get a big warm up in the east after that, a big cool down in the west right here. So this is indicative of a negative PNA, which encourages warmth to surge to the east of it, which we do see happening here. And really, this doesn't change throughout the entire model run. Look at how we get all the way to the 1st of March here. We're still looking at that cold air along the west, warmth in the east. So this is exactly what I was referring to earlier when I was saying that I really think this pattern is going to take us into the springtime. And once we're in the springtime, it's going to be a lot harder to produce snowfall. So in other words, for cold and snow lovers, you better hope we cash in here on one of these next 1 or 2 storms, because this might be, for the most part, it. So anyway, thank you so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe. We do upload weather videos every single day. You can even hit the bell icon for daily notifications when we upload, so you never miss one. Be sure to like the video if you did enjoy it. Leave a comment down below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.